to have ground penetrating radar, and because it was developed at Huntsville. I know Charles knows some people down that way. Here's what ground penetrating radar is.
The main thing that we were looking for from a state perspective is a common operating picture that could be applied across all 67 counties. Virtual Alabama is built upon the Google Earth enterprise, which we took Google Earth and took it behind a state firewall.
We're using it now for economic development projects, for environmental management, for conservation of natural resources. With our imagery, you can populate the gas lines, water lines, stoplights, stop signs, fire hydrants, floodplains.
We're really working hard to help bring situational awareness to our schools, being able to see interiors of buildings and floor plans to provide fire evacuation routing and emergency planning for those administrators in those schools. And also, Google Earth gives us the ability to be able to see camera feeds.
Our Environmental Protection Agency uses it quite extensively also. So back at their office, they can actually see if anybody is violating the environmental protection laws.
Every week we get new reports from our user communities of the different ways that they're using Virtual Alabama.
We want to say, look, here's a platform that we can provide to you for free. Now, go out and do great things with it. Whatever Google comes up with, we then can take advantage of to make our application better.
Well, that should make everybody feel warm and fuzzy about ground penetrating radar. Now, code enforcement officers have been to this gentleman's house. As a matter of fact, this was emailed to me while I was up on this in Virginia here just a day or so ago. And this is a Korean War veteran. He's 79 years old and he gets 30 days in jail for junk on his property. That's a photograph of his yard. I mean, the man fought in a war for this country, and here now we are throwing him in jail because he has something on his property. It's quite unimaginable to me that we have come this far in this country. Now, at the end of this, we'll kind of get into what you can do and what we should be alerted to in order to try to alleviate this problem. I rather think if in major cities, at least, if we had just a few people that were alerted to this, retired, and knew how to stop this, we could stop it in short order through the legal system. I do know that there is a Mr. Steve Scott in Florida. The code enforcement officer doesn't even come to their neighborhood anymore because he has been so successful in extracting money from risk management of the state of Florida because they violated the Constitution, not constitutional rights. We have no constitutional rights. The unalienable rights affirmed in the Constitution. So at the end of this, we'll kind of go over and have a Q&A on what you can do. What will it mean in this modern sustainable community with how do we cope with products now that need to be disposed of in a proper manner? And I'll kind of go over this rather quickly. This is RFID, radio frequency identification chips, and I think most everybody has already heard about this. These chips can be mounted in anything. They're real small. For instance, here's a chip, you can't even see it, in a paper container. This is in the top of a medicine cap. This one is inside a label that's in the coat, and this is in a flip-flop shoe. These are just some of the examples of where you might find an RFID, radio frequency identification chip. Now, if you hold your money, your currency up to the light, and I don't think it's in a $1 bill, but they're in 5 or up, you'll see a strip. It is a passive RFID chip. You hit it with a gun or reader, and it will bounce a signal off and return the information of what denomination that chip is. So we've had trucks, tractor trailers moving from Atlanta through Birmingham that they just randomly stopped and happened to find over $1 million in the tractors. So I'm sure that this was just a random stop and they just happened to find that money in the truck. Well, this is a slide from a proponent of RFID chips. They're actually trying to sell the chips, and there's a reader in the shelf that reads all of the chips on the containers, and it could read any kind of information that would be desired to put in the chip, so it knows when the container's put there, it knows expiration dates, and just a litany of things of whatever the manufacturer would want to convey to the database regarding the ingredients in the container. Now here is a grocery cart. You want me to knock that bug off the thing? Does that bother anybody? Is it? Well, we'll let him go over there. Yeah. Unfortunately, if it smells over there, can't help that. Grocery cart. All of the groceries in this cart have an RFID chip in it. You don't literally have to go through the checkout anymore. And this is old information. This has been around a long time. All you have to do is just walk out and they'll electronically deduct the credits from your bank account and put it into the grocery store bank account. We have smart refrigerators. Part of the stimulus money was to encourage you to buy a smart appliance. Smart refrigerators is just one of them. It's intended to communicate with your smart meter, your electric meter on your house. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that yet or not. But at any rate, if you don't have carbon credits and the proper ecological footprint, it would turn off your refrigerator or any one of your other electrical appliances in order to bring you into compliance with the regulations. Now, a smart refrigerator recognizes what's been put in it, recognizes when things are removed, creates an automatic shopping list, notifies you when things are past the expiration date, and shows you possible recipes from what is in the refrigerator. That is just some of the selling points of that smart refrigerator. Now, I was talking to an individual that sells RFID chips, and he said that you could actually put one on a gallon of ice cream and determine if it had gone over the allowable temperature for that particular piece of, for that ice cream. And it would notify you when you put it in there that it should be disposed of. Likewise, if you pulled out a frozen item and put it beside your smart stove, it would read that chip and preset everything and tell you how long it had to be in there to cook it so that it would be adequate for your health, because we want to protect your health. Now, you also have smart washing machines. It would read out, all of the labels and tell you whether you've mismatched things and what needs to go in the washing machine. I was actually telling a woman about this that works at the Montgomery Legislative Office, and she said, I can't wait to get all of that. And I thought she was going to back up and say, no, I don't, but it didn't work that way. Now, here is a slide that shows the whole process that I've just gone through. We have the manufacturer and the shipment as it goes to the grocery store, and it's picked up and then goes to the individual's home, and then it goes into the recycle bin. Well, I just think about that gallon of ice cream that you put in the refrigerator, and you're notified now that it's got to be disposed of, so that great big database in the sky says, I'm looking for it to be disposed of in the trash can. And if it's not disposed of, I have no idea whether a code enforcement officer would come by or whether a medical officer would come by to see if you're in good health or how this might work its way through the system. But I was in Chattanooga not too long ago, and there was an individual who is a direct descendant of Davy Crockett, and his name is Davy Crockett, and he was at the time the Director of Sustainability for the city of Chattanooga. In his presentation, he made the comment about triple bottom line, because we have to be measured in those three aspects: social, economic, and environmental. And I said, during the Q&A, I asked him, how does a RFID chip factor into the triple bottom line? And he said, and I thought he actually would back up because he was actually in hostile territory, because this was a Tea Party presentation that he had actually asked to come and speak to. Well, he didn't back up. He said, he just kind of puffed up and he said, oh, well, we're already doing experiments with readers on trash cans so that we can determine when you properly dispose of containers and recycle, and we can give you credits. So it's just a wonderful, warm, fuzzy thing that we're doing here. Urban growth boundaries, you have UDA's, what is it, UDA in Virginia?
Urban Development Area.
Urban Development Area.
UDA.
UDA. So we actually have three labels for this. The one, urban growth boundary, is actually in another document from the state of Minnesota, and it's described in that document, From Policy to Reality, Model Ordinances for Sustainable Development. Urban growth boundary sounds rather restrictive, so we've changed the name, which is, you'll find, is very applicable to the Hegelian dialectic. We now have utility service area. So instead of saying, I'm not going to provide you with services such as electricity and water and road maintenance and other things beyond this line, we now say, I'm going to provide all of those things inside the utility area. So it kind of puts, you know, the glass is half full instead of it's half empty situation. Just makes you feel better about what we're doing to you. Well, in this particular situation, the land value on the outside of the UGB actually becomes worthless because you can't find anybody that's going to buy a parcel of land with no utilities and no occupancy certificate. Of course, on the inside, because we now have a shortage of land that's available for the free market, we have an escalation in price. This is a socialist agenda trying to equal out the social justice aspect of property ownership, essentially is what we're talking about. Well, in Portland, where this has been going on for a very long time, we have examples now of what happens after this agenda has been in operation for a while. This home was probably built in the 1950s, a rather comfortable home, nice, spacious, sold for $154,000. And because the land now is so valuable, this house was torn down, and in its place were these houses. There were actually 6 houses built there, 16 foot wide, and these are entry-level homes at $150,000 a pop. So you can see how it affected the value of property. Now, infill, if you look at your comprehensive plan for your area, it's going to have the word infill in it. This is the city of Auburn, Alabama. This is their comp plan 2030. And that's kind of a generic term. You'll see various applications of Vision Plan 2020, and it has a number of things. They all sound the same, and they're all exactly the same, just a little bit different wording. And it says infill development is development or redevelopment in an established area of the city. And it goes on and says this might be developing a vacant lot or redeveloping an area with more intense or dense uses. Now, a lot of people have the perception that zoning protects my private property rights and maintains the value of it. We now have zoning overlays. When they put this in place, they have something called transferable development rights and or purchase of development rights. Washington County here in Virginia just recently adopted the PDRs, as it's called, purchase of development rights. And by the way, that's what Mrs. Googe was talking about. They're going to borrow money and set it aside for open space. In this case, we buy the development rights for those parcels of land outside the UGB because the people can't sell it and it becomes a marketable commodity. There's a number of different methods of doing this. One is to create actually a bank where these transferable development rights are sold. So on the inside, let's say that you were zoned for 4 apartments for a block. Well, you buy enough development rights, you could put a 10-story building. So you could have a stack and pack situation. So this is a zoning overlay, as it's called. And these are form-based zoning laws and regulations. There's a whole litany of new labels and new concepts that's coming in, and it's not designed to protect your private property rights or the value of it. It's designed to restructure society. Now, in this case, we're talking about infill. Now, we have 2 very modest homes here. I would imagine they're probably $40,000 or $50,000, maybe 60 at the top. But we have an example of infill, and we now are in the process of construction, and here is the proper infill for this local area. So you can, this is what happens when you have a socialist agenda. Now, the residents that live within this house have to conform with all the rules and regulations and the freedom of choice and everything else that goes along with this. Now, this is a slide I usually use to divide the subject matter, and this, I like to call this the wheel of sustainability. And it says these are just some of the linkages that relate to sustainability. And I usually make the point, and want to make it here also, that if you're an electrical engineer or working in some area of electricity, and you know that sustainable development is affecting the rules and regulations, take that information and try to alert your professional partner or anybody in the field. As a matter of fact, there's one example of where the ICC codes were adopted in a small community in Alabama. The person bought a Blockbuster video store that had gone out of business, wanted to turn it into a gymnasium where people could come and work out. Well, because the city, Sylacauga by the way, had adopted the ICC codes, they had to strip out all of the electrical lighting system. And when the owner of the property found out what had to be done, it stopped him dead in his tracks. He couldn't move forward. And here now was the electrical contractor that had already been hired, was in the process of removing or renovating the building to suit the needs of the new owner, and he couldn't go forward, and the new owner didn't have the resources to put this in place. So this is already taking, in my view, regarding the ICC codes. Now I want to pick up on food policy and how it relates to sustainability. By the way, we need to have sermons. We need a third great awakening in this country, and we need sermons taught on what happens when you adopt the tenets of sustainability and how it relates to social health, for instance, or land use planning and what it means to your property. And property is not just the parcel of land and the rights to it. It actually has the right to breathe. That's the very beginning, because life is the very first aspect of property. Here now is a slide from Clackamas County, Oregon. We have a green ribbon committee, and we have an urban center and a metropolitan food shed around that urban center. It is intended that all of the food that is consumed in the metropolitan urban center is grown in that food shed. Anything that comes from outside is will have to face a mitigation fee. I like to call it a sin tax against Mother Earth. Here now is the Sustainable Agricultural Law for Georgia. This is HB 225. I have a full copy. This is merely a page long, not long at all, and it has the basic definition for sustainable development written into the law. This was just enacted last year, and it says we need to make sure that we can allow the future generations to meet their needs and improve the ability of, let me back up and say, to meet the needs of the present and improve the ability for future generations to meet their own needs while advancing progress toward environmental, social, and economic goals. So that incorporates the basic tenet written in 1987 of sustainable development. And Section 3 merely says that all laws and parts of laws in conflict with this act are repealed. So there is a movement now trying to remove this. For instance, how this would be applicable if a tomato was grown outside of the food shed in Alabama and shipped over the state line into the food shed for Georgia, one of the counties, then you'd have to pay some kind of tax for importing it outside of the food shed. This is an interactive map on the internet. All you have to do is click on the state. This is for the state of Tennessee. I used this when I was in Knoxville just recently, and here are some of the food policy councils that are popping up in the Tennessee area. They will write a food charter. This is the Greater Birmingham Community Food Charter, and it says access to nutritious, affordable, culturally appropriate, and safe food is a basic human right. So we have to provide food for everyone, and no matter what the cost. We have had already several food summits in Alabama. This was for 2009. This is the Alabama Sustainable Agricultural Network. Their 990 forms are on the internet. They are funded by the federal government. They are going to Montgomery, building a coalition that have some political muscle to ask for organic certification of locally grown food. The local farmer is coming on board with this. He perceives it as some way of saving his market and protecting his livelihood, when in fact it is a way for suicide for local farmers, because there's no way that you're going to be able to keep up with all of the management practices that are required for certification of this program, and it will be, the best management practices will be something that will run him out of business over a period of time. Now, unfortunately, I didn't think to fix this. It's going to disappear. It's a handout, and I have plenty of these handouts. I'll just flash it up one more time and let you take a look at it. It's a brochure that we put together to try to explain sustainable agriculture. We can actually take our name off of the bottom of it and give you that copy. You can put a label on it and make it a handout for yourself. Anything that we've done that you think would be a handout for you, put your contact information on it and use it. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's lots of organizations doing what we're doing. You know, we don't need a lock on anything. This is not about any ego from us or any part of our organizational ego. We need to have as many people doing as much as we can in order to slow this up as best we can. Food Policy Council will create a food charter. One of the planks of that food charter would read something like this. The term food citizenship is defined as the practice of engaging in food-related behaviors that support, rather than threaten, the development of a democratic, socially, and economically just and environmentally sustainable food system. Now, to me, the point I want to make about that particular statement is sitting on the fence is something that you're not going to be allowed to do. Because if you have no opinion about this, if you're not enthusiastic about your local food shed, you're threatening your food citizenship. This next quote says that food democracy or food citizenship recognizes that consumers can identify the interest of others, and they are food workers, other consumers, future generations, that's intergenerational equity, and other species equity. So I'm sure that we have to make sure that the chicken feels comfortable as we're about to decapitate him. At any rate, the reason that is so very important is because it's in a thesis at Drexel University. This was an individual that was looking for a doctorate, and she was trying to impress somebody in her thesis, so she included this comment talking about food citizenship. Food charters, and this is one of your handouts, this goes into food security and what it actually means. This paragraph actually talks about greenhouse gas emissions, exploitation of resources from Mother Earth, a whole litany of things that we have to regulate, including water, so you can kind of get an idea of what a food charter and a food citizenship will mean for your local area. Social justice is frequently mentioned in all of this, and here is a definition. I went to the internet and got a definition so we could all get on the same page. Social justice is progressive taxation, income redistribution, property redistribution, equality of opportunity, and equality of outcome. So that's just nails it down. This is pure socialism. Next, with any of these programs, you have new words, and this was a new word for me. This is locavore. He is merely an individual that has dedicated his existence to consuming foods within a 100-mile radius of where he lives. And these are two articles, two magazines that have already had articles on this. This one way back in 2006. I don't know what the date on this one was, but this is the 100-mile diet is the name of it. And we have an individual that has used an ecologically friendly mode of transportation to go out into the farmland and gather his food. So he is securing a positive note on his balance sheet because he's not using gasoline that depletes the resources of Mother Earth and endangers future generations for resource extraction. Food miles, the distance that food miles in order to get to your plate. This is a poster that's intended to go up on the school wall, and I can well see that a teacher who would be the authoritative figure would be speaking to maybe a group of children, 8, maybe 13 years old, and she says, oh, you should care. Putting a guilt trip on these children that carrot that flew in from California degraded the environment for a little birdie on the way in, and can you imagine the birds may hatch and may never grow up to be a big bird and lighten the life of somebody in the morning by chirping. I can just see a child hearing that and thinking about it. Some of the costs that are associated with food miles that you're not currently paying, of course, would be transportation, soil degradation, irrigated related groundwater depletion, pesticide and fertilizer misuse. The USDA has declared that fertilizer is a pollutant and has to be regulated. I know some farmers that are having problems spreading chicken manure because the USDA wants to regulate it. This is another slide I'm picking up now on transportation and sustainability and how it relates to the subject. This is a slideshow that says that transportation is not an end in of itself. In other words, I thought I could just get an automobile and move from point A to point B and that was it. I didn't have to worry about anything else, but no. It goes on and says, well, we're going to support individual and collective goals in our vehicle miles traveled program. Socialism has got to be involved in this. So I went out and looked at this as transportation funding options for the state of California, 2003 through 2022. And in this report now, it says, equity issues include income distribution, urban, rural, and regional geographic differences. And then by now you should recognize this, intergenerational equity. We've got intergenerational concerns wrapped up in this funding program for the state of South Carolina. This is 2009, and I thought this was a very colorful front page for this report. The Department of Transportation for the state of Tennessee actually put this report together. And this report is compiled and written by the elite class of 2008. So we get together the leaders that are involved in this field, and they're the ones that actually put this together. Now here's what they had to say. The first approach starts with the premise that we need to convince you to change the way you live. And that primary objective of this approach is to reduce VMTs, vehicle miles traveled, by restructuring society such that your needs for work, shopping, personal and social services, as well as recreation, can be met in our community by driving only short distances, walking or biking near your home. So that's pretty much how we're going to restructure everything. When you hear a federal, especially a federal official, talk about VMTs and offering you options, they're going to be walking, bicycle, and public transportation. Never mentions any other way of moving from point A to point B. Now here is, I'm only going to pull up one quote from Agenda 21. This is chapter 40. It's actually 40.4. And it says, commonly used indicators such as gross national product and measurements of individual resource flows or pollution flows do not provide adequate indications of sustainability. We can't, 1992, we can't look at you in a real-time basis and determine how much of Mother Earth's resources you're exploiting. So we need to, in this next sentence, create indicators of sustainable development in order to provide a solid basis for decision-making at all levels of government and contribute to a self-regulating sustainable system. Now, remember in the beginning I was talking about a governance system is the rules and regulations that determine how you interact within society. So now here is an example, the best example I've been able to find. This is the logo for the I-95 Coalition. And of course, I-95 runs from Maine all the way to Florida. It is all of the transportation's authority in that area, including some in Canada. There's a total of 35. And here now is the label for this particular report. This is 34 pages long. Multi-state VMT-based fee institutional and legal analysis. In this report, it says that we're going to take the information from your computer on your automobile, which has a GPS tracking device in it, and when you go to the gas station to buy a tank of gasoline, the information is transferred to that great big database in the sky, and it determines where you were and when you were there. In other words, if you drove through an ecologically sensitive area and there was a little birdie that was endangered, and you of course have furthered the endangerment of that species, then you would have to pay a mitigation fee for having driven through that area. Or perhaps you have driven through a socially unjust area and we need extra taxes to make up for the terrible situation that these people have been in for so many generations. In order to do that, now you've got to pay that mitigation fee. Now this particular document goes in and says, well, there may be some local officials that would not want to buy into this. My opinion is that we have a degrading environmental situation, not environmental, but economic situation currently. And it's not going to get better. So this is a way to extract money from you without enacting an ordinance. Nobody's going to lay a hand on you. You're not even going to have a chance to know that it was done probably. And you'll have to pay that fee right then if you want to get the gasoline. And all the local official has to do is hold out his hand, and Uncle Sam or some consortium is going to put a check in it. So I think it's a done deal. There's no worry at all about instituting this. Let me pick up now on plan use planning and greening development and how it interacts with the Biodiversity Treaty. And here now is the Southeast Ecological Framework. All of the green area that you see is no human intrusion zone, 10% buffer zone, and 40% of the remaining land mass is where we're going to be allowed to live. Now this also says that all of the species of plant and animals that were brought here by European man are invasive species and have to be removed. All of the predator animals that European man have done away with or were here when he came have to be reintroduced. So I do know that there are farmers that have had their cattle and their other wild livestock that have been destroyed on account of animals that did not exist when I was a young man. They have in fact been reintroduced. This particular slideshow was created by the EPA Region 4 out of Atlanta. We have here an Eco Hub, which is intended to be 5,000 acres or larger. Could be 1 acre. It could be that a stakeholder committee would come out to your small parcel of land and say, oh, that's a Eco Hub, a wetland in and of itself, and you need to protect it. So we're going to have to make sure that you don't build anything on here or don't disturb any of the little critters that may be alive in that particular acre of land, or even smaller. Well, we also have an interconnecting corridor that runs from this Eco Hub to this Eco Hub over here. We want the animals and predator animals that may be in one Eco Hub to be able to move through this interconnecting corridor, never seeing any structure created by man, never knowing that man was ever on this earth. The concept behind this high-thinking PhD type of thought says that we want to have the animals to move from one Eco Hub to the other so that they don't degrade their gene pool by intermating over the next 1,000-year period. And that 1,000 years is quite interesting, to me at any rate, because I know that Hitler was setting up his regime to last 1,000 years. At any rate now, here is that interconnecting corridor. This is another government slide. I didn't create this one. This interconnecting corridor has a black line. I would imagine that might be as wide as 2 acres, maybe even larger. Just depends on what the stakeholder committee might want to designate. And it says, linear features linking core areas wind through human-dominated land like agriculture or development. And it allows animal, seed, pollen, movement between the core areas. And down at the bottom it says, linkages calculated separately between forest, wetland, and aquatic core areas. If you look at the map for Virginia that has just been published this past June, we'll look at some of the areas that I have here for, unfortunately I didn't get this specific area. The area on the coast of Virginia is an aquatic core area. The Coral Sea is designated as an aquatic core area for Australia, and they don't allow them to fish in that area. So this is going to affect, have far-reaching implications. Now here is Richmond, Virginia, and when I punch the button, you'll see how much land is set aside. And this, by the way, was published middle of last year by your Department of Resources. All of the colored area is no human intrusion zones, or non-human intrusion zones. In the Southeast Ecological Framework, they use shades of green. The purple that you see here is actually the interconnecting corridor from one core area to the other. And these are the maps that the state of Virginia has produced, matching what the federal government is requesting. So you can see how much land is set aside for animals. This one is Pulaski, and you can see how much land is set aside in that area. Going on further now, here is Washington County, and you can see how much land is set aside. And actually there's a pretty good bit of white area in this particular. Of course, we may relocate people from Richmond, Virginia down here. I don't know how that might work. This is now Habitat 2. Remember, we're talking about Global Plan of Actions. It's not just Agenda 21. This is 1996 Habitat 2. And this is the graphics from that particular conference. And notice Mother Earth is gently caressing and protecting human settlements. So this speaks volumes about what the concept is behind this Habitat agenda. Now this is, the quote I'm going to pull up is actually from Habitat 1, 1976. And it says, land, because of its unique nature and crucial role it plays in human settlements, cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by you, the individual, and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. So right there in that very first sentence, we don't want the free enterprise system because it's absolutely inefficient. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. So if you made a crying dime off a parcel of land, you committed an act of social injustice. Now, if we leave this alone, if we allow this to continue or unchecked, it may become a major obstacle in the planning and implementation of development schemes. Social justice, urban renewal, and development, the provisions of decent dwellings and healthy conditions for the people can only be achieved if land is used in the interest of society as a whole. And the very last sentence says, public control of land is therefore indispensable. So we have to do away with private ownership of private property in order to institute and implement our scheme of social justice. Now, that was their definition of what ownership of private property is. Now, this is Joe Neal here on this side of this label, and I have several of those back there. If you want more, take more, and pass them around. Joe Neal is the representative, I think, from Richland County, South Carolina, and he now is going to tell you what is the purpose of private property rights.
Well, what we're facing is a plan for growth and development that's being implemented by County Council here called Vision 2020. It is a flavor or a type of smart growth legislation. And what that simply means is that a vision has been developed by planners for this area. They want to dictate how growth will occur or not occur in this area. And by that result, who will profit or not profit by that plan. And what this plan does, very simply, is to lay out a vision of this area that includes the evolution or creation of villages. They want to force all growth in this area into villages, high density, high population villages. Around these villages will be drawn what are called urban boundary zones. These urban boundary zones will delineate the village from the surrounding countryside. And those two entities, the village and the countryside, will be treated differently by this legislation. Property that is not in the village will find that it is lessened, reduced, or eliminated. Property within the village will find that property will gain or rise in value because that's the only place where development will be allowed to occur. Now, as an example, recently we had a resident here who put in an application to build a barber shop in his little community. He happened to own some property on the side of a highway in a rural area here. He was told that he could not. That instead, if he wanted the barber shop, he had to go into the little village nearby, or little community, it wasn't even a village, and purchase a site there or negotiate with someone where he has a site to allow him to put up a barber shop. Now, what that did was to render his property useless. The purpose in owning property is to find some way to make that property produce wealth, whether it's growing a crop or putting a small business on it. For rural people, particularly in this area, who have never had the opportunity to translate their holdings into wealth, to be told at this point that that can never happen, that they will be denied access to water and sewer, that the only place that water and sewer will be able to go will be in the villages that are designated by this plan. That's the problem. It creates a two-tiered system of people and societies here. Those who are in the village will be allowed to accumulate wealth, their property will rise in value. Those of us who are in the rural areas who are not in the village will find that the property values are dropping, that we're not allowed to do anything with the property practically that will produce any wealth. That robs these property owners of wealth. It's a takings, in my opinion, because of that.
Well, I agree with him. It absolutely is a taking. Now, how do you get people to accept the concept of property rights and that the fact that if you own a parcel of land and you make some money off of it, that it's an act of social injustice? Well, here is in a few minutes, I'm going to show you an example of how you actually create a community that might accept this. Now, these organizations, and these are just two, there's several organizations that are pushing for the concept of earth rights.